Scientists say
Scratch that. You can see for yourself that we're living in the Anthropocene, the geological age in which a single species, us, has dramatically changed the face of the planet. Our presence can be felt on the highest mountains and in the deepest pits of the ocean. Soon, if the wishes of some folk come true, we will be able to take all our Earth junk and move to outer space.
I think that's why it's important to get a self-sustaining base, ideally on Mars, because Mars is far enough away from Earth that a war on Earth, the Mars base might survive. It's more likely to survive than a moon base.
The answer to when we became important enough to influence geological timescale depends on who you ask. Some trace the beginning of the Anthropocene to the time when agriculture was first developed. Others are more modest and point to the 1950s to the period known as the Great Acceleration, when human activity increased dramatically in some parts of the world. But regardless of when it started, it seems to be headed for a quick exit. The reason, if it's not obvious enough already, is that some of us seem to be interested in a good time, not a long time. The rate at which we extract, consume, and waste Earth's resources is so ridiculous that we're on the cusp of doing irreversible damage to Earth. The classic who gives a shit about the rest attitude that has come to define our time has brought forth a series of global challenges, and we know them by different names: climate change, land degradation, mass extinction, resource scarcity, pollution. Now, one would imagine that threats of this size and scale would force us to get our shit together and secure our futures. But this is no feel-good story. Or maybe it is, but we're not there yet. Our responses to these earth-shattering, literally, problems have ranged from willful ignorance and straight-up denial to half-hearted pledges and false solutions. To say that they have been inadequate is an understatement. And our failure to act is proving more deadly with each passing day. Changing climate patterns are causing disasters, loss of livelihoods, and chronic resource scarcity in many parts of the world. Millions are already migrating out of climate hotspots and high-risk zones. We're not just running out of fossil fuels and other rare minerals that power our computers and vehicles. We're running out of more elemental resources like clean air, water, and fertile land. Resources that we simply can't do without. Despite supposedly being the golden age of human advancement and knowledge, we are overwhelmed, experiencing a sense of collective cluelessness that the writer Amitav Ghosh calls the Great Derangement. In a book of the same name, he points out that future generations will look back at our time and wonder what allowed us to remain so oblivious to the existential dangers around us until the very end. The answer, we think, lies in stories. Humans are and have always been profound storytellers, and advertisements have certainly understood that. Be it cinema or celebrity gossip, we simply can't resist a good one. But stories do more than just tickle our imaginations. Some are so deeply embedded into our collective consciousness that it's almost impossible to separate them from the truth. We are concerned with these stories. Sociologists call them imaginaries and believe they can shed light into why we live the way we do. Here's an example. If you're watching this in India, what connects you with the 1.4 billion other people in the country is not the personal relationship you have with each person or even the place they come from. In fact, it is almost impossible to know all the 766 districts, let alone understand the diversity of religion, culture, customs, and festivals in each of them. But the stories about India, repeated time and again in the form of history lessons, celebrations on national holidays, rituals of democracy, and other cultural nuggets, are what help us relate to each other, allowing us to feel like a part of this giant imagined community that we call India. This is not the only example of an imaginary. There are several such powerful stories underlying our culture, politics, and economic relations, quietly guiding our thoughts and actions. Think of imaginaries as the water in which we, the fish, exist. Imaginaries influence not just the present, but also how we think about our future. What is possible, sensible, and justifiable in the future depends on the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves today. Changing these stories, sociologists believe, may be the secret ingredient to large-scale social transformation. For instance, democracy would not have replaced monarchy in large parts of the world if people had not imagined and wanted a different future. In order for the change to occur, people had to first create stories about them by looking into the future and imagining what could be in a world where people govern themselves. Big social transformations, therefore, require equally big changes in imaginaries. And herein lies our failure with things like climate change. From changing ocean trash to shoes or using solar to power shopping malls, the way we're dealing with it is all about extending the present for as long as we can. We're working with what we know to be true right now, but unfortunately, that's changing very quickly, whether we like it or not. What is needed, in fact, and climate activists, you better be taking notes, is to stop for a second and think about what we want our future to look like. The surest way to replace the stories that got us here in the first place with those that we'd like to see in the future is to, well, live them. And that's exactly what people are doing. From using decentralized tech to drive social impact, to experimenting with non-hierarchical and self-sustaining communities, to prioritizing eco-sensitive education, to taking affirmative action to counter historical injustice and prejudice, people across the world are imagining their lives and futures differently by implementing projects of radical change. Regardless of their size, scale, and importance, a common thread unites all of them. In each of these stories, communities cease to become passive and distant observers, content with just watching shit go down. These stories, unlike what we have now, are responses to real needs and real dreams, growing and evolving as they develop. But countering the strength of the dominant stories is hard, especially because everything we know is built around them. And that's why the birthing of new imaginaries is a collective effort that requires all of us. They cannot be products of a single mind, but must be shared visions for the future. For the strength of new stories lies in the number of people who believe in that particular vision. To those thinking that it's too late, remember this: all stories must come to an end, and so will the one we're living through. The only question is, are you going to be a part of the next one? So here's what you can do. Pick up your tools, step out into the world, and live the future that you want to see. Or at least, start by imagining it. This video was made as a part of the Grounded Imaginaries Project. Check out our website and Instagram linked in the description below to find out how different communities in India and Australia are creating new imaginaries to fight the climate crisis.